In a decision that will echo for years, the Supreme Court has struck down the Trump-era tariffs, fundamentally changing American trade policy. The ruling, announced August 11, 2025, targets the legal authority used to impose billions in duties on steel, aluminum, and Chinese goods. This is a direct challenge to the president's power to shape international economic relationships with limited congressional oversight. The tariffs, justified under national security, sparked years of volatility for businesses, consumers, and trading partners. Now the Supreme Court has redrawn the boundaries between the president and Congress on trade. The decision forces a national conversation about America's future in the global economy. The U.S. is still grappling with inflation and supply chain issues, and the removal of these tariffs adds a new variable. Supporters said tariffs protected American industries. Critics argued they raised costs and triggered retaliation. The court's action ends that debate, but opens a larger one about the future of American protectionism. The legal and economic unwinding of these tariffs will be complex, affecting billions in duties and countless business plans. This ruling sets a precedent, limiting future presidents from using national security as a broad justification for tariffs without clear congressional approval. The shockwaves will be felt from manufacturing plants to tech firms, forcing a re-evaluation of U.S. trade strategy. The balance of power in trade policy has shifted. The world is watching how America will respond. The next chapter in U.S. trade begins now. To grasp the Supreme Court's decision, we must revisit Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. This law gave the president power to impose tariffs if imports threatened national security, a tool rarely used until the Trump administration. Trump applied it broadly, targeting entire industries like steel and aluminum, arguing that weakened domestic production endangered military readiness. Critics, including defense experts, saw this as economic protectionism, not genuine security. The tariffs were sweeping: 25% on steel, 10% on aluminum, and escalating duties on Chinese goods under Section 301. These moves marked a sharp break from decades of U.S. free trade policy. The administration aimed to force new trade deals, but instead triggered global uncertainty and retaliation. Allies like Canada and the EU were hit, sparking diplomatic rifts and counter-tariffs on American exports. The result, a tangled web of economic conflict that the Supreme Court is now unraveling. The era of aggressive unilateral tariffs has ended. The tariffs created clear winners and losers. U.S. steel and aluminum producers benefited, boosting profits and jobs, at least temporarily. But industries relying on these metals, automakers, appliance makers, construction, faced higher costs and tough choices: absorb losses or raise prices. Many reported lost competitiveness and shrinking margins, effectively making tariffs a tax on American manufacturing. Globally, the tariffs strained relations with allies, who retaliated with their own duties on iconic U.S. products. The China tariffs sparked a trade war, disrupting supply chains and hitting U.S. farmers hard, as China targeted soybeans and pork. Farm incomes plummeted, forcing the government to issue billions in aid to offset losses. The paradox tariffs hurt some sectors so much that subsidies were needed to patch the damage. The policy's ripple effects were felt from the Rust Belt to rural America. Retaliation and uncertainty became the new normal. The Supreme Court's ruling now forces a reset. The winners and losers will shift again. The debate over protectionism is far from over. The numbers tell a sobering story. Studies found that while steel and aluminum production rose slightly, the overall U.S. economy suffered. The tariffs reduced GDP, raised business costs, and led to higher prices for consumers. Research showed the full cost was passed to U.S. importers and families, costing households hundreds more per year. The claim that foreign exporters would pay proved false. Americans bore the burden. Job gains in protected industries were offset by greater losses elsewhere. For every job created, several were lost in other sectors due to higher costs and retaliation. The trade deficit didn't shrink. Imports simply shifted to other countries. Tariffs failed to spark a manufacturing boom or rebalance trade. Instead, they diverted trade and made the economy less efficient. The data is clear. The costs outweighed the benefits. The Supreme Court's decision reflects these realities. The U.S. must now chart a new economic course. The Supreme Court's ruling in American Institute for International Steel versus United States centered on the separation of powers. The majority, led by Chief Justice Roberts, found the executive overstepped by using Section 232 for broad economic protectionism. The court revived the non-delegation doctrine, ruling Congress can't hand over its core legislative power on trade. The law, as used, gave the president a blank check. Unconstitutional, the court said. The immediate effect, tariffs under Section 232 and related Section 301 are void, and customs must stop collecting duties. The decision resets trade law to pre-2018, nullifying executive orders that created the tariffs. Section 232 remains, but its use is now tightly limited to genuine security threats. Congress, not the president, is back in charge of trade policy. The ruling has triggered a massive legal and administrative scramble. Importers who paid billions in duties will seek refunds, launching a wave of claims and litigation. Sorting out who gets what, and whether refunds include interest, will be a bureaucratic challenge. Many importers passed costs to customers, raising thorny questions about who should be reimbursed. Trade compliance systems built for tariffs are now obsolete, forcing companies to rapidly adjust pricing and sourcing. The sudden change brings relief for many, but also new disruption as businesses recalibrate. The ruling's precedent will make future presidents cautious about imposing tariffs without clear congressional backing. Trade policy is shifting back to Congress where it constitutionally belongs. The era of unilateral executive action on trade is over. The immediate fallout is mixed. Steel and aluminum producers lose protection and face renewed foreign competition, risking layoffs and closures. But industries that use these metals, automakers, appliance makers, construction, will see costs drop and margins improve. Lower input prices could ease inflation and spur new investment. Companies may revisit supply chains, some reverting to old partners, others keeping diversified sources for resilience. The transition will be bumpy, with logistical challenges and strategic choices ahead. Protected industries will likely seek new forms of targeted protection, such as anti-dumping cases. The broad tariff era is over, but trade disputes will continue in new forms. The debate over fair trade versus free trade is entering a new phase. The landscape for American industry is shifting once again. The ruling's impact reaches far beyond economics. It's a diplomatic reset. Removing tariffs on allies like Canada and the EU eliminates a major source of friction, opening doors for renewed cooperation. The US can now work with partners on shared challenges like China's trade practices and climate change. The decision signals a return to alliance-based foreign policy and multilateral solutions. With Section 301 tariffs on China voided, both nations have a chance to de-escalate and stabilize relations. The US will still confront unfair practices, but through targeted, rules-based means. The ruling restores America's credibility as a champion of the global trading system. International institutions like the WTO may regain strength, the long-term legacy, greater predictability and stability in global trade. The Supreme Court's decision is a watershed moment, rebalancing power between Congress and the President on trade. The ruling dismantles a web of duties that reshaped supply chains, raised costs, and strained alliances. While some industries will struggle, others will thrive as uncertainty lifts. The data shows tariffs cost more than they delivered, failing to revive manufacturing or cut the trade deficit. The ruling clears the way for the US to rebuild alliances and focus on market-driven growth. Legally, it sets a precedent. Future trade wars need clear congressional approval. The debate over America's trade strategy is far from over. It's just moved back to the political arena. The challenge now, crafting a trade policy that's competitive, fair, and ready for a new global era.